In this vid, I'm going to be taking a look at a deck by the Cann1998. When I first saw this deck, I thought it was just a typical Reshiram Typhlosion deck. But when I started to look at it a little closer, he's got some really interesting text that you're not going to see in every deck. So let's take a closer look. You run 2 Smeargle and 1 Cleffa. While I personally prefer Cleffa, I understand why you run both. My problem with Smeargle is that I don't want to risk portraiting a Juniper. However, running Cleffas mean that I run a higher risk of getting donked. So if you want to run both, I think that's a decent idea, but I would run 1 of each instead of 2 Smeargle and 1 Cleffa. I would also throw in 1 Tie Rogue. Since you're already running 1 Cleffa and you're running the risk of a baby donk, running 1 more would ensure that hopefully you can get the donk back yourself. Your main attacker is Reshiram. Blue Flare does 120, but makes you discard 2 fire energy, so you add in Typhlosion in order to put them back. What I typically see in Typhlosion decks are 2 Typhlosion set up on the bench so that you can afterburner twice to put both fire energy back onto Reshiram to be able to attack again the next turn. Right now you just run a 1-1-1 line of Typhlosion, so I would recommend increasing that to a 2-2-2, or if you have them, a 3-3-3 in case one of your Typhlosions is knocked out. The 2 Reshiram, though, is a good number because you can always use revives to get them back. You run a 2-1-2 non-ability Embor. While I really like Flare Blitz, it forces you to discard all of your fire energy. Since you're pretty much relying on fire energy for this deck, this could leave you in a very dangerous predicament. With a 4 retreat cost, if you don't have the switch in hand and you use Flare Blitz, you're stuck up there. Typhlosion's Afterburner still means that with a hand attachment per turn and 1 Afterburner, it's going to take 2 more turns to get this thing powered up and ready to go again. So I would recommend either dropping the Embor completely or throwing in 1 ability Embor and 1 of these Embors. That way you have a backup for attaching energy, but you can still use the Flare Blitz of this Embor. You run a 1-1 Ninetales for draw power. Roast Reveal says that when you discard a fire energy from your hand, you can draw 3 cards. Since this is a great draw engine, I would recommend increasing this to a 2-2 line, just so you can ensure that you have 1 on the bench at all times. You have a couple of water techs in your deck that are your snipers. A 1-1 line of Vaporeon and a 1-1-1 line of the non-ability Samurott. Dual Splash chooses 2 of your opponent's Pokemon to do 30 damage to each, and Pike does 30 damage to the active and then 30 damage to the bench. Because this is a straight fire deck, I would recommend dropping the water energy from the deck and just running this Samurott because you can still use the fire energy to attack with Pike. This means you can still get your snipe in as well as do a little bit of damage to the active. So let's take a look at your energy line next. You're running 11 fire, 1 rescue, 2 DCE, and 3 water. If you decide to drop the Vaporeon, I would drop the water energy in this deck as well, and just rely on Pike to snipe. At first I didn't care for the DCE in the deck, but then I realized that not only can Samurott use it with Pike, but so can the Hollow Embor with Flare Blitz, and because it only says discard the fire energy, this means that you could possibly turn around and attack with it the turn after. But Reshiram can also use Outrage with a DCE. Likely you wouldn't want to attach a DCE to Reshiram, but you never know when you might be forced to. So if you have another DCE, because it can be used on 3 of your Pokemon, I would maybe increase that line to 3. I don't think you need the rescue because you have pretty good recovery and pretty strong lines if you can increase that Typhlosion, so the rest I would just leave as fire energy. Now let's take a look at your trainers and supporters. You have a very strong recovery line, 1 Flower Shop, 3 Revive, and 3 Energy Retrieval. I think if you add 3 Junk Arm in this deck, you can decrease both of these down to 2. I would recommend 3 Junk Arm with 2 Revive and 2 Energy Retrieval, and then again you can always use your Junk Arm to utilize other trainers as well. You run 3 Switch, which I understand why you run the high number because of the non-ability Embor having such a high retreat cost, but I would recommend dropping this down to 2. With the implementation of Junk Arm, you can always use it again. The biggest thing that you're missing from this deck is a way to get basic Pokemon into your hand. I would recommend a combination of 3 Pokemon Collector and Dual Ball. Right now you just have 1 Collector in the deck, and I know Collectors can be kind of hard to come by, which is why I think the Dual Ball is an excellent substitution. I like having a high amount of cards that can search out for basics, because with the 3 communication that you run, you can always turn those right back around and pull out evolutions. You run one Interviewers, but I think this is a card that's safe to drop. Because you run so many different types of energy and so many fire energy, you shouldn't have a problem drawing into the cards that you need. You run one Elm, which I think is perfect. I'm not a fan of this card. With more Vileplume decks coming out, one Elm is a very safe card to run. You have excellent hand refreshers, one Copycat and 3 Pont, although I might drop the one Copycat and put 4 Pont in instead, since Pont is a little more consistent in decks that don't require you to have the same hand size as your opponent. You also have the one Juniper just in case. I don't like saying more than one Juniper per deck, because if you actually play 2 or more of them, the chance of you decking yourself are pretty high. You run one Rare Candy, which I think is a good number because you only run 1 line of Samurott and 2 lines of Emboar. Technically, you could increase this to 2 Rare Candy, but if you use Junk Arm, you can always reuse it. And finally, you run the one Twins, which is just a great card for coming back from behind and helping you get set up for the rest of the game. Overall, I think this is a pretty good deck. It's not your typical Reshiram deck since it's got a few twists and turns in it, but I think it's still a very strong deck. So, if you would like your deck to be reviewed, just send me a PM with the list, and whether you like a video review, which is going to take about 2 weeks to do, and I'm going to have to start choosing which decks I feature and which I don't, or I can do a blog review, which I can get up in about 2 to 3 days. Thanks for watching!